So welcome to our opening session on the topic of food and landscape plenary before we break into smaller sessions. I have with me three very interesting women, two culinary luminaries whom I'm not planning to introduce at all, Claudia Roden and Elisabeth Luard, and Joshna Maharaj. And Claudia and Elisabeth will each be talking. Claudia will be talking specifically about Catalonia and the relation of food and landscape in a specific environment. Elisabeth will be talking more generally about cross connections. And then Joshna will be talking about institutional food landscapes, and we'll be getting quite political at that point. So for the first 2/3 of our session, and I'm kind of a draconian person when it comes to time, so I promise that we'll end. Perhaps since we started a little late, we'll end a little past the half hour. And there will be time for questions for Joshna at the end of her session, but otherwise it's not really a public debate thing, it's more of a presentation. There will be images running while Claudia and Elisabeth are speaking, and while I'm talking to them. And those images are Elisabeth's paintings and my photographs, kind of interspersed. They're just going to be running on a 10-second pause, and they'll be looping. And they're just food and landscape. For me, almost any image is a food landscape. So you might be surprised at some of what you see. And they range around the world and have to do with everything from shepherds to pleasure at the table. So let's get started, Claudia. Right. Please take us away.
Yes. Well, the title of our talk is The Landscape in a Saucepan. And I've taken it, or we've taken it, from the quote from Josep Pla, who was a Catalan. He was writing about politics, about all kinds of things, but was extremely interested in food. And he was thinking of Catalonia, this region in northeastern Spain, where the link between the hugely, incredibly diverse landscape and the cooking is striking. I thought this was, for me, one of the most interesting places to see how the food and the thing. Well, there are, anybody who's been there, fantastic high mountains, spectacular gorges. They've got lakes and woodlands and a broad river valley, lagoons, marshes, and also that long coastal strip of sandy beaches. And dotted around are medieval villages when you travel around, Romanesque towns.
Can we have the images, please? Sorry, I'm interrupting. I should have said this to the AV guy. Can you start the slides, please?
Can you hear? Yeah, okay.
Sorry, Claudia.
Yeah, and yes, and Moorish castles, Knights Templar castles, the ruins, of course, and fortified farmhouses with towers. So this landscape of the land and also the history behind it is very much there. Now, the majority of the population lives in cities on the coast, but most of their grandparents would have owned land and had farmsteads and been employed working the land. Now, Catalans revere their landscape. Everywhere people either care very much or not so much or despise their landscape sometimes. But here you do see people really love landscape, and the favorite activities are hiking, cycling, horse riding in the countryside, and hunting for wild mushrooms and game. Now, from the late 19th century, there was a Catalan excursionist association. It was part of a movement to encourage Barcelona elites to discover and value their countryside. And today, there is, I'm not sure if that association is still existing, but the landscape plays a romantic role in the recognition of a Catalan national identity. And people are passionate about it, as they are about their food, which is the richest, most complex, and sophisticated of Spain. Now, the food, too, touches on identity, and they are very strongly compared to many countries and many regions. and it plays a role in the national ideology as well. Now, during the Franco regime, the Catalan language and culture were suppressed, and artisan food products were discouraged in favor of industrial ones that could feed the population cheaply. When Francisco Franco died and the region became autonomous in 1978, everyone began valuing or revaluing their sometimes almost lost local artisanal food products. Producers rushed to obtain protected designations of origin, and these indicate the geography of the place. They got them for their wines, their olive oils, their sausages, and their hams, and their cheeses, their beans, their rice, their honeys, their pigs, their capons, their turkeys. Everything mattered, and everything had a spot where that was really proud of making it. Well, there are several Catalan styles of cooking, and again, this is how they relate to their landscape. There's one of the sea, one of the mountains, one of the great, vast Ebro Valley, and the urban cuisine of Barcelona and other cities. Now, the most popular fish and seafood dishes, the soups, the paellas, the fideuà, are what fishermen once could not sell. And they fished for their own consumption because the elites only valued meat. And people were afraid of eating crustaceans and lobsters, including lobsters, because they were too ugly and too frightening to eat. So now, of course, it is the most fashionable, the most popular food, the food that all the tourists go for, because they see them in these paellas with all these crustaceans, all there looking ferocious. But and there are also mar y montaña dishes, sea and mountain dishes, like chicken and lobster, for instance. And that's where, because the cliffs come right up to the beach, and it makes sense that it's a mar y montaña. Now, the mountainous interior has a continental climate and a gastronomic culture of the Pyrenees. Cows, goats, and sheep are raised for butter and cheese, and there's intensive pig farming, which provides a huge variety of embotits, sausages, and salamis. And the region is especially famous for its fresh botifarras, its salami-style salchichon, and the spiced longaniza and fouette. Now, the coast, with its deep blue sea, luminous sky, and fragrant air, with its hot summers and mild winters, belongs to a very, very different world. The Mediterranean world, which is a world of street markets and festivals, where people ramble and meet in open-air cafes, and where a meal is a place of interaction and conviviality.
But Claudia, surely those meals of conviviality also happen in the mountains and in the Ebro. I mean, those meals of conviviality, isn't that all Catalan?
Yes, because that's exactly what I'm going to say.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No. Because the Mediterranean...
She said she didn't mind if I interrupted her occasionally.
Because this Mediterranean food culture invaded deep into the mountainous Catalan interior through the broad Ebro Valley, river valley, where irrigation allows for flamboyant agriculture, but also the people who actually brought the food and cultivated the food. They're people who actually had an influence on the whole Mediterranean at one time. They were Muslims, and they were Moriscos. It means they were Muslims who had converted to Christianity, who were brought there to actually do the cultivation because they knew how to do it, because the others were more shepherds, whereas part of their role or their activity in Spain was actually to grow and agriculture. Now, you see never-ending vineyards olive and citrus groves, fields of wheat, and seas of rice. There are orchards with apples and pears and peaches and apricots, plums, cherries and figs, and you see almonds and hazelnuts, which you find in the food, of course, in the dishes. And then vegetable gardens are full of tomatoes, peppers, aubergines, artichokes, beans, lentils, chickpeas, and so much more. But to me, I have to say, having mentioned already the Muslims who were there, that the ghosts of the past are in the saucepans too, and on the plates. And I only have to look at a saucepan and smell something, and I know who's been there. And you would if you knew as well.
Claudia?
But yes, so Catalonia shares her food culture with all the countries around the Mediterranean, because they share a climate and they share a history, so an incestuous history, and because they traded with each other for centuries. They were part of the same empires and had the same occupiers and settlers who left their mark on the landscape and on the tables.
Claudia, I want to stop you there
Yeah.
and start with Elisabeth, because we're
Okay.
now at trade and interaction and intersection. And Elisabeth's going to talk to us about larger cross-exam, and we are invited to interrupt her. So you and I can interrupt her with questions.
That is
Elisabeth,
formidable.
turn your thing on. If it isn't on, I don't know. Is it on? It is on. Yes, all right. Okay.
Yeah, no. Okay. I just said that's formidable. So Claudia's Catalunya feeds into where I brought my children up and where I lived, and that was Andalusia. And what you're talking about with the Mediterranean and the fact that it fed up into the mountains was very visible in Gerald Brennan's South from Granada, where I can't remember if the village was Yegen or he gave it a different name, and the name is right. Anyway, it's in the Alpujarras below Granada, where the Moors went, the last sigh of the Moors when they went back. And going there in the 1960s, probably early 70s, went to the tapa bar, where, you know, the sort of in the square, where everybody gathered, coffee and glass of whatever it was, slightly dry white wine, something, and I'm looking for a tapa. And they said, well, you know, you should have come here before because we had anchovies. So, okay, we have a valley that comes up from the Mediterranean, and on donkey back, the fish came up. And the villages nearer the sea got the better fish. And by the time it got up to the top, it was the anchovies, cheapest of all. And they were pickled in vinegar. And I said, well, why aren't they doing that now? And they said, because of the silkworm industry. And when the silkworm industry disappeared in the 1920s, there was no longer a market for the silk. The cocoons went down on donkey back. The anchovies came up, the cocoons went down, and you got to the tapa bar in Yegen, and the answer was no anchovies.
Because there were no more silkworms. So there were no more donkeys going up and down.
No more reason. And I said, well, what about lorries? And they said, well, the price of petrol went up. So if ever you're traveling around Europe and you see a mulberry tree, there will have been an old silkworm industry. So food is completely embedded, as I'm sure you know, in people's lives. So these practical considerations come in again and again. We have a market, we don't have a market. We can get pickled anchovies, we can't. Well, they pickled them themselves. So that interweaving of people's lives and a very specific memory was still there in the 60s. I don't know, because you were in Catalonia much more recently. Is it still there? Do people still know where the salt route went?
Yes, they talk about it a lot. In fact, they're so into their history. And, well, one of the things that I would say later, but I'll say it now, that I was invited by one of my friends, Pepa Aimami, who is the director of the Catalan Institute of Gastronomy that was set up or was formed.
Don't worry, it just seemed to be stuck.
That was formed really to preserve and keep their gastronomy. And she had there several people who were part of the Institute of Gastronomy. There were historians and nutritionists and sociologists, a chef and all that. And they go around collecting recipes. They do many things, but one of them from the fishing villages, in all the villages. And they research in home cooks and professionals, and it goes on. But they are so interested in how they came about. And so all this is coming up about their roots. Even the first thing that they told me, which I didn't know, was that they considered Catalonia the queen of the Mediterranean. And it was, in the Middle Ages, the queen of the Mediterranean. It had trading posts all the way to Egypt, and it had, when they were the dominant partner of the Catalan Aragonese kingdom, they had an empire around the sea that included Valencia, the islands of Mallorca and Menorca, Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, Naples, Macedonia, parts of Greece, the North African island of Jerba, and the French Provence.
But that's also tells us that what we see now, we always have to question. We have to look back, because we can't assume that the national borders now or the trade patterns now are what's always been. It's clear that they are as an expression of change, not an expression of now.
I think people know why they're doing things, and they don't necessarily talk about it. You've got to get quite deep to find out, like the anchovy thing. So I know anchovies, and there's a story behind it, and people will know it. Yeah. And they will sort of assume that you might know it too. Don't be silly. Of course there are no donkeys, and there's no fish, and there's no silkworms.
But I think in Catalonia, because they're so interested in themselves as being separate.
Well, because they've had to be. Otherwise they wouldn't have survived, right? Yes. I mean, that's that intensity.
And so their stories are stories many of them know, at least the food people know. And you go to a place, and they tell you that they've got the recipe from a 13th century book, from Saint-Sauvy, from this one. Yeah. And, they also bring up names of cooks from the 10th century who came from Baghdad. The lute player, Ziryab, was a lute player who brought cooking as well, because he not only brought music. But so there is that, but also recent stories. What they're also interested in is their heroes, and also what happened to them during the Civil War. They are intensely concerned with who they were, and food tells them who they were.
There's a story that when I lived in Spain, again, because we're in the same area, but it kind of applies universally. During the Civil War, hunger was such, unimaginable hunger, and the bitterness between families or different valleys was really almost unexplainable. People still remembered. And I had a gardener. Yeah. Well, not a particularly good gardener, but he did teach me that you had to plant garlic under lemon trees, and then you didn't get black fly, things like that, very useful stuff. And he said as a little boy, he would watch at the foot of a cliff. There was an eagle owl's nest. An eagle owl is a big bird and rather unpleasant. Well, I don't know if it's unpleasant, but it's a raptor, and it picks stuff up, and, it collects like a vulture, but it also kills things. And there were a lot of rabbits in the valley, and the eagle owl would prey on the rabbits, bring it back to the nest for the babies, at which point the little boy, who was my adult gardener, ran to get his father. His father climbed up the cliff and took the remains of the rabbit from the nest. Now, those sort of memories are incredibly powerful, and people just don't forget them. They don't forget what they ate during the war they wouldn't have eaten any other time. This applied to truffles, rather interestingly, until they discovered that the French would give them lots of money for truffles. The idiot French, what are they doing with this stuff? because the pigs ate it, everybody knew pigs ate it, and when you ate the pig, you ate what the pig ate, and you didn't want to remember that, and you didn't want to talk about it. So that kind of information is sort of underneath, isn't it? Everybody knows what it is, it's just under there. Everybody knows the significance.
But I also think that there's a time limit. Remember yesterday listening to Colin, and he said in 1970, the war,
Yes.
the memory of the war, I'm talking about the Second War and talking about the UK, is finished, and then people forget the respect that they had, or the patterns that they had, or the frugality that they had, and they move forward and they lose.
I think they do more than forget. I think they want to get away from it.
Well, and so to go to James Rebank's point, we need to retrieve those things, those wisdoms. I mean, the Catalans may hold them already, but in most societies, if they're industrialized, we lose them.
What was wonderful about James is this is first-hand information. How often do you get that?
Yes.
You know, that was spectacular.
And also, but also is discussion of trust, which I think is the other thing that goes in industrialized food societies, unless you're a strong national entity like the Catalans, in which case there's more to do. I'd like to turn now, abandon these images of the possible, and go to and listen to Joshna talk. But I want to just I want to say, Elisabeth, I want one more thing from you. You talked to me about necessity, and necessity being the thing that connects food and landscape. And one of the things you said to me was, a great phrase, but the three things we need, our three primary things, are food, sex, and cave. In other words, shelter. And so necessity, what you have there is what you have to deal with. If you have rats and only rats, you eat the rats. If you have, that's how we think of it. And I wanted you to talk about that a little because I want to say, I think we have culture. And it's not just necessity that drives us. We have things we won't eat, even if we're starving. And I think that there's a very interesting thing that culture gets shaped by necessity, but I think there's and landscape, absolutely. And food, there's a transaction that goes on between the three of them.
You quite quickly get into taboos, what we won't eat and what we will eat. And I rather suspect that differentiates ourselves. So we're campfire. We're going back to the cave, which is, of course, enormously interesting. The Lascaux caves. Anybody been there? Lots of people see the pictures. To me, it's a menu, a wish list or a menu. You have the deer and because I do both, I paint and I cook, I relate very strongly and just burst into tears, rather embarrassingly, in the Lascaux caves, because they say who we are. First you get the food, then you have the sex, then you find the cave, because that's the safe place. And we still think that, in modern times, it's underneath. That is the main preoccupation, underneath. That's what we need to do. So, okay, that's enough of that.
And so now I'd like to shift, and if we could shift the images, we're going to go to listen to Joshna talk about food in food landscapes that can be horrifically barren, and her point that needn't be horrifically barren. That's a fair introduction,
Absolutely.
isn't it? Joshna is a chef who lives in Toronto, and she's also you'll see, a social activist, a food activist.
Hello, can you hear? Okay, great, thanks. Thank you for that lovely introduction. As Naomi said, my name is Joshna Maharaj. I'm a chef in Toronto, but I need to tell you that I have intentionally not been a restaurant chef. I do community food security work, and really, basically, my work is about finding spaces for chefs outside of restaurants to connect and support communities. So for the past, say, 6 years or so, I have been doing work in rebuilding institutional food systems in Toronto. I've had the chance, anyhow, to tackle 2 hospitals and 1 university to rework their food service, notoriously horrible food service, to see if we can improve the situation for everybody in the hospital and on that campus. So I'm going to take you through some of the things that I have learned. All right.
And they're not all beautiful.
They're definitely not all. The beginning is not so beautiful.
Just
So historically, public institutions are rather dismal food landscapes. And this is pretty standard across the board. I'm learning even across the planet. This is sort of the way it is. This is the look of a hospital tray. It was egg salad or tuna salad day, right? And up to the right, you have a sort of lukewarm cup of water that a tea bag will be dunked into with really minor success. There's some applesauce in a container to the right, and I think there's some sort of weird soup up there, right? All of it is sort of not very warm. It smells really sort of sweaty and unappetizing. And this is what shows up 3 times a day for a person in a hospital, right? Next up, institutional food is cheap, it's highly processed, and often inedible. This is meatloaf, right? And I just happened to walk past it in the kitchen, and I was like, oh, that's a perfect before photo, right? How many adjectives to describe how horrible this looks? Never mind the notion that we actually fed it to a bunch of sick people, right? An hour before I took this photo. No kitchen should need this much cornstarch. So this photo, thank you. When I show this photo to like public health folks or education people, nobody gets it. But when I show this photo to people who cook, everybody gasps, because that is a very telltale sign of what is going on in that kitchen, that the cornstarch bin is actually bigger than the all-purpose flour bin, right? Everything that goes out of that kitchen is resuscitated with a cornstarch slurry, right? And so when I saw this in this kitchen, I made a vow that before I left, by the time I left, that bin would disappear. And thankfully, it was like the day before I left. I was like, I gotta deal with that bin. And it became spelt flour because we had new recipes for quick breads and muffins. And so the cornstarch returned to a more appropriate small can size of a thing, and spelt flour was there. But I love this photo just for the key indicator about what's happening. Now, how did things get so bad? I have 2 big ideas about why this happened. First, food is treated as an irritating necessity in public institutions that is just best left outsourced. To the lowest bidder, in fact, right? They don't really want to have to deal with it at all, so they best just give it to somebody else and do it for the cheapest and kind of just don't bother me anymore, you know? That's generally the attitude. The other important piece, and particularly in hospitals, is that nourishment has long since been abandoned, right? We've accepted food that is just nutritionally adequate. It doesn't matter that it's whole.
Or not even adequate.
Or not,
Excuse
really,
me.
it's
Sorry.
really the truth. No, it's the truth. And the population of dietitians has really been professionally compromised because accountants and big food have made decisions about what is appropriate and affordable to feed patients. And we've had to dispense with any really accurate notion of what good nutrition, let alone nutrition to support healing, should actually look like, right? So, another important point here is that we once knew how to do this. These new ideas about food are not crazy hippie granola ideas, right? When I first started at a hospital in Scarborough, a week
In the East End of Toronto.
In Toronto, yes. A week in, somebody brought this to me, and you can see these recipes were typed on a typewriter, and they were actually recipes that were used in the hospital to feed patients, right? And in the walk-in fridges, they still had hooks where the carcasses used to hang, where they break down an animal, and there were 5 vegetable cooks, and someone whose job was just to make rolls every morning, right? What a thing. Now in 2013, when I started, there was 1 cook. One who just put a bunch of frozen stuff in a soup kettle and then served it up, right? That was it. So important to note that we knew how to do this, and then at some point we chose something else, right? I feel like that's a really important point to remember, is that we decided to take this turn so we can also decide to return. The point being, we have the power, we have the capacity to rethink this and to pull ourselves back onto more appropriate paths. So, what happens when you shift priorities? Can you actually rebuild a broken food landscape? Enthusiastically, I can tell you, yes, you definitely can. So, first up, refocusing priorities on nourishment and connection can completely change the landscape. This is the thing, right? The priority around institutional food is about low cost and efficiency, and don't bother me too much with it, right? It should be sort of separate, dealing with itself.
But the cost then to the patient's health isn't factored in. 'Cause
Not at all.
It's a different set of accounting.
It's another budget line, right? That is exactly the ridiculous truth. Now, if we're going to say that food is a human landscape, which I actually very much believe, then rebuilding a broken landscape must reanimate the hands that move the food from field to kitchen to table. And this is, to me, where it gets really, really exciting, right? If we want to rebuild a space, the humanity and the food are sort of the two things at the top of the list, in my opinion. So this is about bringing farmers back into the situation. It's about having patients and students know that they're human beings on campuses and in kitchens cooking with them in mind, right? Cooking so that they know that someone actually will feel better, or to support somebody stressed out during exam season or whatever it is. That is the connection and the link that I'd like to rebuild. Okay, so this is my hospital team. Now this is where the good news starts. So we started cooking again, right? These kitchens, when I'd walk into the kitchens, I wouldn't see knives, oil, or salt anywhere. And as a cook, that tells me that no cooking is happening, right? Nothing is being chopped, nothing is being seasoned, and nothing is being sauteed, right? Everything is sort of weirdly in a steam kettle, cornstarch slurry, and off it goes, right? But the other sort of madness is that we have staff who've been working in institutional kitchens for 25, 35 years who didn't know how to chop an onion, right? So we had to go right back to the beginning and have a knife skills class for everybody. Because now we were bringing all this farm fresh produce in, and they had to, you know what I mean? They kind of had to hustle a little bit and move through the stuff. But thankfully, they all had a really, really good attitude about it. And they understood what we were trying to do, and they played along.
I can see that on the one
Yes.
at the back, she's completely terrified he's going to chop his finger off.
100%. And she was very hesitant to go near that knife at all.
Yes.
Right? Yes. Other visuals of the landscape, right? It was the idea that a basket of fresh apples was in there. I wanted to have real apples instead of this weird bag of sliced apples that had been doused in something so that they don't turn brown, right? I was like, how about we just put an apple on the tray? But the dietitians, so we got apples in. They were big, gorgeous Honey Crisps that come from Torrey Warner in Niagara. Dietitians freaking out because the portion size was too big, right? And I was like, but it's an apple. Anyway, so I went back to the distributor. We called the farmer. I was like, what are the chances that you have any smaller apples? As it turns out, he's like, yes, I have number threes, which ordinarily would have gone for cider or fruit cocktail or something. He's like, I'd be very happy to have a market for them, right? And these are perfect little 4-bite things. They look really cute on the tray. And I thought, now we have a market for this in institutions, and I was very happy with myself, right? The other important thing is stock. Right? I sort of blew my mind that we were in a hospital and there wasn't always a bubbling pot of stock. With all of the garbage that they put on that tray, I thought to myself, it'd be much smarter if you just give somebody 250 mils of good chicken broth and an apple, and they're better, right? They're better off than that whole tray full of nonsense that you were offering up. So seeing pots bubbling on the stove and seeing bright baskets of produce was a new visual, right? And I walked in with a lot of excitement. Because you can see in the back, behind the apples, is the woman who was like, her job is to open the cans and portion pudding or applesauce or whatever terrible thing into those containers that goes on each tray, right? She does it with as much love and care as one can, but there's a limit on how far you can go, right? So this is, I love both of these visuals. Next up, we took staff on field trips to a farm. I can tell you, I've done 3 overhauls of institutions, and the trip to the farm is guaranteed the most pivotal change moment. People go to a farm, they see people who work so hard growing food and making those connections, and I literally saw good food light bulbs go off above everybody's head. They got it, right? They came to me and said, are we actually going to serve this food to patients? And I was like, well, I'm working on the money bit of it, but yeah, that's my intention is yes. And she said, this woman who assembled trays on the Beltline, She said, really, I would be so proud to serve this food to patients, right? And there's the other piece, is what is the experience of these folks? What is it like to do your job for 27 years and fill those trays and watch it take a route up to a room and then come back down pretty much the same way it left, and then all go into the garbage? And it's all the garbage. It's not separated because infection control, everybody goes a little crazy, and it all just goes into landfill, right? So nurturing the staff really felt like a very important way for me to really attempt to pull the reins back on this beast. Next is we started eating with the seasons. So, I'm from Ontario. We grow a mighty fine strawberry in Ontario. And every year we all wait until we can gorge ourselves and then move on to peach season or whatever, what's coming next. But the strawberries were the first move that I made on the plates. And I called the farmer who grew them, is Maurice Gervais at Berryhill Farms. And I said, Maurice, I'm so excited about this. Your strawberries are the first things that I'm putting on the trays. After having a huge debate with the dietitians about whether the green tops stayed on or off.
Oh, come on, seriously?
Yeah, because somebody thought they were a choking hazard. I thought, right? I thought they were a tiny little handle. But they thought it was a choking hazard, right? And then we had to factor in the labor to snip the tops off of all of that, because that had to come from somewhere, right? The game is no joke, yeah, for sure. But the funniest thing was, as soon when I knew these were coming in, that nice gentleman is Hung, who was the receiver, and I said, Hung, the minute these strawberries get in, you have to come and find me, right? So here he is, very happy with himself. Strawberries are here. I said, now in this space, you can see behind him, we have like 4 walk-in fridges and 2 walk-in freezers. And I said, Hung, put these in the produce fridge. And he looked at me, blank. I was like, and then I got it. And I said, Hung, there is no produce fridge, is there? He said, no. So I got a piece of tape, put it on the door of an empty fridge, and I wrote, exactly, I wrote produce on it, and I was like, here we go, my friend. Now we have one of these 4 giant fridges that's not holding cardboard boxes full of weird juice, is now the produce fridge. But amazing, just to see where you are, right? And what the culture and the priorities are. The fact that a box of strawberries was this really sort of foreign, bright, alive thing. So, the new trays told a story about scratch cooking, seasonality, and connection with the kitchen. So this is a version of a new tray. I wanted to do an experiment, right? Because this labor thing was so curious. I wanted to know what we could do if I had a crack team of cooks who were all on it to be able to really pound out scratch food. So I brought a chef pal in to cook, and we made an exclusive, entirely locally sourced meal in February in Ontario, which is not nothing. And so we roasted turkeys, we made a beet and potato salad, there's a quick vegetable pickle, mushroom consomme, and a apple and sour cherry crumble with a little bit of custard. We cranked it out. It was a huge, big day, but it was so funny because we roasted chickens and we roasted beets and potatoes, and the people who had offices near the kitchen literally followed their noses in, right? And they were like, what are you doing in here? Right? And I would put my hand on their shoulder and I'd be like, we're cooking. It's just cooking. This is not steam table weirdo, whatever. It's actually cooking. And here's the big point. When I added up the food costs for what we spent, we only spent 33 cents more per patient than we would have spent for their regular meal, right? So the bottom line verdict is we need more money, but it's a little bit more money for an exponentially better experience. Other spaces in the institution started to change, and this is where the landscape broadens, right? Because we're talking about a culture change, where the problem is not just about where we shop from and the recipes we use, it's about the role that food plays in an institution and the kind of priority that it has. So we had a local food expo in the atrium at the Children's Hospital, which was a very lovely time with somebody dressed up as a celery, and it was very sweet and lovely. Thankfully, that was not me. And here's on the Ryerson campus. We took we did some ads. I overhauled the menu on this campus, and we really wanted to freshen it up. And I loved that these were the visuals that students saw when they were rushing to class, to have some sense that they're human beings who are cooking fresh food that was actually in the ground not that long ago, right? With really their health, their welfare, and their pleasure in mind. And we had fun with kids' activities. The Disney princesses are great, but I like this as my junior propaganda for the revolution, right? I had to do a little something. And it was so much, I loved seeing these covering the walls of the wards when I'd walk through the children's hospital. It was very cute and sweet, and they'd go up on the trays with the kids' meals. And we serve fresh, wholesome food all the time. These are samples from the to-go line. These are the things that are prepared foods in the fridges on campus at the university. All of these things have some locally sourced element, if not completely, and everything was under $5. There is no reason why. We can do this, right? We can make simple, fresh, well-sourced food that does not have to cost a lot of money. We made it work, and these things flew off the shelves.
Quick question, Joshna.
Yes.
When you have patients or people who are institutional, whatever it is, stuck with the food that you're cooking, do they recognize it, or a lot of them not cooking at home, and are they taking your ideas back home?
It's a great question. They definitely recognize it, because that nice tray that you saw, we delivered it to a patient, but his neighbor was like, grabbed my hand and was like, I'm getting that tray for lunch too, right? That's coming here too, right? It's not just him. And so they are absolutely. And what we noticed too is there's always that little blue slip of paper on the tray that has the patient's name and the diet and whatever they've been served. But we discovered patients start saving them up and using them as eating guidelines. Terribly dangerous when you have an older Southeast Asian man hunting down a loaf of Wonder Bread and a can of tuna, right? Because that's what the hospital served him, and he'd probably be much better whatever traditional food was being cooked in his house, right? But the teaching opportunity of that is very, very great, and that was inspiring for me.
And Claudia has a question.
I wanted to say that we did, and I did exactly the same thing in London several years ago. I went with Caroline Waldegrave. We were on the Guild of Food Writers. Right. We decided we wanted to change the food in hospitals. And we went to Guy's Hospital and offered to do a whole menu for them. And at first they were frightened. Yes. For 3 months they thought we were going to make the cost very much high. Yes. They were told no. And then they, after 3 months they called us because they went to France and they saw that a hospital had changed their food. And then we worked for a whole year with them. And I can tell you it was a fantastic experience for me. And fantastic experience for everybody involved, including the cooks, because the joy. Sure. And at first, the head chef, or the head cook there, who was Italian, didn't want us. He thought we were going to come and
make trouble.
Put him down.
You're going to make trouble
for him.
Take his job,
And then when we came, the first thing we said, what did you cook at home? Because he was born in Italy. And then he came up with this chicken with herbs and garlic, a roast chicken. And so joy, we worked with him, but joy with everybody in the kitchen. And I have to say, we really tried recipes over this year. We kept trying them, working with a nutritionist. And when it happened, we also went to the Royal College of Art, asked them to do a design for the menu so that people begin to think, this is a dish we want to do. And so, the menu we wrote, we gave names to the dishes. But some names they accepted, some they didn't. I mean, when we started by saying Hunter's chicken, a French one, no, we don't know. When we said it's a dish with wine and garlic and herbs, no, I don't like garlic. Some people don't, so we took out the name. And then there was one...
They left in the garlic. Yeah, right.
They left in the garlic, I love it.
But there was one, we did one cracked wheat salad, and I called it was bazargan. It was Syrian. Bazargan means the things from the bazaar. And they said, no, not Syrian. You see, Syrian at the time was, what did you call it? What was it? The thing of evil?
Yes,
Axis of evil. So no axis of evil. But anyway, but
No
what-
strawberry handles, no axis of evil. Are we seeing a theme here?
No, but
Seriously.
in the end, it cost a lot less
Yes.
because they were
Yes.
putting all these tins, and we did a stock,
Yeah.
a chicken soup. We just found out exactly what they wanted to eat, and all fresh and good. Well, it was a joy. The BBC came to, and it lasted for 3 years, because after 3 years, but before that, St. Thomas's decided to do like guys, so they got all the...
But they still had functioning kitchens, right?
Yes.
They
But
had can
don't
openers,
anymore.
but they don't anymore.
Because
Huh.
after 3 years, they said that they were going to do like all the other hospitals do. They all give it out to a company that does for everyone. But they said, we're going to give them the recipes and tell them to do it.
Nonsense.
No.
Yeah,
That's
well,
not the point.
No. But so that's something that worked, but doesn't anymore.
I know
I
this
hope-
story. I know this story
Yeah.
well. Yes, definitely. And there's lots more to say about exactly
so
that.
Joshna, just one more minute, and then we're going to open
Okay,
the questions.
deal. We also work to reconnect people to growing food. So this is something I'm most proud of. This was a 1/4-acre farm on the top of the engineering building on campus. And in one season, we harvested 2,000 pounds of organic produce from the rooftop. And I told them, because the engineers had given us clearance on the capacity and the integrity, but I said, just in case, please, let's not grow pumpkins and squash, and, you know what I mean? Let's give me some green leafy things, a few tomatoes, but let's lighten it up. So we had 2,000 pounds of green leafy things, which is a whole lot of food. And the group who did the work, they have a CSA that they would funnel this produce
community
through.
supported agriculture.
And we had a farmer's market on campus, which they sold through. But I made a deal with them and said that food services would buy everything that they didn't sell. And I sent that to my cooks, and I said, I don't care what you have to do, just make this delicious and serve it and make sure everybody knows that it was grown on the roof. Plus, there's the glorious opportunity between classes for students to come up and get their hands dirty and dig in. It was a very special, beautiful place. And this is their farmer's market stall. Lots of pride about everything that's at the stall was in fact grown on campus. And then we wanted to really reprioritize food in the institution. So we handed out recipes to everybody, but I wanted them designed to look more official and formal. So they played along, and these were the ones that and you'll notice at the top it says, enjoy as needed for good health. And this is just little tricks and things that felt really important to me to really send the message to people about good eating.
Okay.
This is wellness. I'm sorry, I gotta go fast. These were on the sides of coffee cups during exam season on campus. That's the story. And we took time to eat together. We had community meals on campus so that we paused. I wanted everybody to stop the madness of the rushing around and share a meal, have a little conversation. And finally, we wanted to make deeper connections to our community while still serving people well. The glory of this photo is that it is an invoice from a farmer to a hospital. And it was the first time any such invoice was made, and it really highlighted to me the existence even of a farmer-to-patient relationship. So this, in a very, very quick nutshell, are some of the glorious opportunities available when we rethink food landscapes in any context, really.